to my baby brother, who's finally going to run something that matters. That was my mother's toast, and she made it with a glass of the 2009 Burgundy I'd been saving for the day I got married. I heard every syllable of it from the gravel turnaround 200 feet down the hill, sitting in my cold car with the engine off and my phone balanced against the steering wheel. They had no idea I could hear them. They had no idea I could see them. They thought I was at home, sedated, defeated, waiting for a judge in 3 weeks to officially declare me unfit to manage my own life. What they didn't know was that I was the one holding the keys to every locked thing on that property, and I'd spent 11 months waiting for the exact moment they'd all be in one room, drunk, smug, and on camera. The barn glowed gold against the snow. String lights, the good ones I'd hung myself the summer before, dripped from the rafters down to the loft railing. Somebody had hired a string quartet. There was a champagne tower. My brother had his arm around his fiancée, and my father was laughing the way he only laughs when he thinks he's won something. And I sat there in the dark, watching all of it stream in crisp, high definition to the device in my lap, because I am the one who installed the cameras, and I am the one who pays the bill. And not one of them had ever bothered to learn that. I want to be clear about what this place is, because they were never clear about it. Not to each other, and not to themselves. Hawthorne Hollow is a restored 1901 dairy barn outside Rhinebeck, New York. I bought the wreck of it 6 years ago with money I'd earned, every dollar of it documented, and I spent 2 years and most of my sanity turning it into the kind of wedding venue people drive up from the city for. I drew the floor plan. I argued with the contractor about the beams. I learned what a frost-protected shallow foundation was, so I wouldn't get cheated on the addition. My name is on the deed. Only my name. I made sure of that because even back then, some animal part of me knew what my family was. I tapped the management app. The whole building belongs to one network, and that network belongs to me, no matter what story they'd been telling the county. I didn't kill the power all at once, because I wanted to watch the panic build the way you watch a wave gather before it breaks. I cut the music first. The quartet kept sawing away for a second out of professional habit, and then they stopped, and 40 people in cocktail dresses looked at each other, in that uncertain way crowds do when something small goes wrong. Then I cut the heat. Then, 10 seconds later, I cut every light in the building except the emergency exits, which stayed lit because I am not a monster, and I wasn't going to trap anyone in the dark on an icy hill. The doors were never locked. People could walk out the front any time they wanted. That part was always going to matter later, so I made sure of it. The barn dropped into shadow and the screaming started, and even through the little phone speaker I could pick out my mother's voice rising above the rest. I leaned back in my seat and let myself feel something I hadn't felt in 2 years, which was the specific, clean pleasure of being underestimated by people who were about to find out exactly how wrong they'd been. You probably want to know how it got to this. People always do. They ask the question like, there's a simple answer, like one morning you wake up and decide to declare war on your own parents. It isn't like that. It's slow. It's so slow you don't notice you're being robbed because the people robbing you are the same people who taught you to ride a bike, and your brain refuses to hold both of those facts at once. My grandmother left me money when she died. Not a fortune, but enough, a trust she set up specifically for me because she didn't trust her own son. Which tells you everything you need to know about my father. She named me the beneficiary and a bank as the trustee, and for a few years that arrangement held. Then my father, who has the kind of charm that works on bankers and waiters, and absolutely no one who's lived with him, talked his way into being named co-trustee to help me manage it. I was 24. I thought that was what families did. I signed where he told me to sign. By the time I was 29, there were withdrawals I never authorized. $8,000 here, 12 there, labeled, when they were labeled at all, as administrative fees and property maintenance. My mother had a story for every one of them, and her stories were always soaked in concern, always about protecting me from my own choices. There was a home equity line of credit opened against Hawthorne Hollow that I never signed for, except there was my signature, looped and careful, on a document I'd never seen. My father needed a bridge loan for a development deal that, I would later learn did not exist and had never existed. There were 2 credit cards in my name with a combined balance north of $40,000, and the signatures on those applications were so badly forged it was almost insulting. Like he hadn't even tried, like he knew I'd never check. For a long time I told myself I was being generous. That's the lie that keeps you in it. You tell yourself that family helps family, that you're the stable one, the lucky one, the one who can afford to give. You don't let yourself use the real word, which is theft, because the real word would require you to do something about it, and doing something about it means admitting that the people who made you would eat you alive if it suited them. The night the lie finally died, I was in an emergency room in Poughkeepsie. I'd collapsed at the venue during a walkthrough, just folded up on the new oak floor with my chest seizing like a fist closing. I was 31 years old and I thought I was having a heart attack. Turns out it has a name, Takotsubo, stress cardiomyopathy. The heart muscle literally changing shape under a load it can't carry anymore. The doctors call it broken heart syndrome, which would be funny if it weren't so exactly. Humiliatingly accurate. I lay there with monitors taped to my chest, terrified, alone, and I reached for my phone the way you do when you're scared, and you want your mother to say it'll be okay. There were 2 messages waiting. The first was from my father. It said, "Need the combination to the office safe at the barn. The liquor license paperwork is in there, and we've got the venue insurance audit Monday. Send it tonight." The second, sent 4 minutes later, also from my father. "Don't worry about replying if you're busy. Just need it before Monday." That's it? That's the whole thing? No, are you okay? No, we're on our way. His daughter is strapped to a gurney with her heart literally deforming inside her chest, and the man wants the safe combination before Monday. I stared at those 2 gray bubbles until a nurse came in and asked if I was all right, and I said yes. And that was the first true thing in a long string of lies, because in that exact second, I was more all right than I'd been in years. Something in me had gone very quiet and very clear. I wasn't their daughter. I was a resource. I was the thing they kept around because it produced money and absorbed blame. And the day I stopped producing would be the day they discarded me. And somewhere in their planning, they had already started discarding me. I found out how much when the conservatorship papers showed up. That's the part that I think made the most sense to people later, the part that made strangers furious on my behalf because it's a thing that actually happens in this country to people with money and inconvenient relatives. My family had taken that one bad night, the collapse, the ambulance, the hospital, and they'd built a story out of it. A breakdown. Instability. A daughter who couldn't be trusted with assets, who needed to be protected from herself for her own good. They filed a petition for emergency conservatorship, my father and my brother as the proposed conservators, and attached to it was a letter from a doctor who'd never examined me, and a sworn statement from my mother describing episodes that never happened in a daughter she did not actually know. If that petition went through, they'd control everything. The trust. What was left of it. My bank accounts. The venue. Me. I'd need their permission to sell my own property, to sign my own contracts, to spend my own money. They weren't trying to borrow from me anymore. They were trying to legally erase me and keep the husk. So here's the thing my family forgot, the thing they'd somehow lived alongside for 31 years without ever taking seriously. They forgot what I do for a living. I'm a forensic accountant. I spend my days reconstructing exactly the kind of crime my father had been casually committing against me for half a decade. I follow money through shell accounts and forged paper for insurance companies and the occasional federal contract. I read the lies people tell with numbers the way other people read a paragraph. I have testified in court. I have put men in prison for doing to strangers smaller versions of what my own father did to me at the dinner table. When I finally turned that skill on my own life, it took me about a week to understand the full shape of it, and about 11 months to build the case the right way. The way that holds up. The way that doesn't fall apart. The second a lawyer pokes it. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't cry at Thanksgiving. I let them think the petition was working. Let them think I was crumbling. Because a confident thief gets sloppy and a frightened daughter gets discovery. I requested the trust statements I was legally entitled to. I pulled the property records. I ordered a document examination on the loan applications. I made copies of everything, 3 sets. 1 with my attorney. 1 in a safe deposit box. 1 encrypted in the cloud, because the first rule of building a case against people who steal is that they will also try to steal the case. And I did one more thing. I quietly took back control of the systems at Hawthorne Hollow, because every smart hub in that building still routed through the administrator account I'd set up the day the network was installed. My brother's fiancée had reset the venue's public passwords to plan her party. She'd never touched the admin layer. She didn't know it existed. None of them did, which is how I came to be sitting in the dark, watching them stumble around my barn by the glow of the exit signs, holding a 4-pound binder on the passenger seat, and waiting for the part of the plan I couldn't entirely control. I'd called the sheriff's office 20 minutes earlier and reported a disturbance and a possible burglary in progress at my property, which was true, and given them the address, which was mine. But the thing that would actually decide the night wasn't anything I could trigger from a phone. It was my father. I needed him to be exactly who I knew he was. On the screen he'd stopped trying the light switches and the thermostat, and he'd started stalking around the great room like a man looking for someone to hit. My mother trailed him, plucking at his sleeve, and he shook her off the way he always shook her off. My brother stood in the middle of the floor, holding his dead phone up toward the rafters, as if elevation would summon a signal, and his fiancée was crying in a way that was mostly about her dress. 40 guests had figured out they could just leave, and they were leaving, streaming out the open front doors into the cold and the dark, and the long iced driveway, which meant the only people who'd still be there when the deputies arrived were the ones who had nowhere else they were supposed to be. Family. Always family. My father turned and looked at the door to the office. My office. The one room in that building I keep locked, because it's where the safe is. The original deed. The trust documents. The things a careful person keeps behind a deadbolt. I blocked it remotely the second I cut the power. I watched him cross to it and try the handle. I watched him rattle it. I watched him step back. And I knew before he did it what he was going to do, because I'd been watching this man break things he couldn't control my entire life. Don't, I said out loud, to no one, to a phone screen, gripping the wheel. Be exactly who you are. He grabbed a cast iron coat rack from beside the entry, the heavy one, and he swung it into the office door like a battering ram. Once. Twice. The frame splintered on the 3rd hit, and the door caved in around the lock, and a man who had spent the evening toasting himself as the rightful master of the place forced his way into a locked office inside a building he did not own, on camera, to get at documents that were not his. That was the line. Up until that swing, this was a family dispute. The county does not care about family disputes. They show up, they sigh, they tell you to call a lawyer, and they leave. But a man smashing his way into a locked room inside a property registered to someone else is not a family dispute. That's burglary. That's criminal mischief. The math of the entire night changed in the second that frame splintered, and he'd done it himself, with his own hands, because I asked the universe for one thing, and the universe delivered my father. I started the engine. Heat poured over my frozen fingers. It was time to go say hello. The deputies came up the hill with their bars flashing blue across the snow. 2 SUVs sliding a little on the grade I hadn't bothered to sand. And the relief inside the barn was instant and pathetic. My mother came stumbling out the front door into the cold, the same front door that had been unlocked the entire time. And she ran at the lead deputy with her arms out and her face arranged into the exact expression of a woman who has been wronged. "Thank God," she cried. "Someone's done something to the house, the power. We're trapped. My children are trapped." She gestured back at the building where her grown son was standing in a heated coat in a building with 4 open exits. My father came out behind her doing his version, which was authority, chest out, voice loud, already demanding a report, already saying the word terrorism, already announcing that someone had hacked his home and held his family hostage. The word his did a lot of work in those sentences. It always had. I parked at the bottom of the turnaround, picked up the binder. and got out into the wind. The cold went straight through my coat. But I didn't shiver, because I'd been cold for 2 years and this was nothing. I walked up the drive with the binder against my chest, and my boots were loud on the ice, and the lead deputy turned at the sound. "Ma'am, I need you to stay back," he said. His hand drifted toward his belt. "We've got an active call here." "I know," I said. "I'm the one who shut the power off." My mother's head snapped around. For one full second, she looked at me like I'd risen out of the ground, and then her face rearranged itself into the soft, sorrowful mask I'd watched her wear at funerals and parent-teacher conferences, and every single time she needed a stranger to side with her against me. "Officer," she said, dropping her voice to that confidential stage whisper, putting a gentle hand on his arm. "This is my daughter. She's not well. We've been trying to get her help for over a year. It's why we're here. The family's been managing her properties because she had a breakdown. A real one. She was hospitalized. She must have done this. Please be careful with her. She's fragile." The deputy's shoulders came down an inch. I watched it happen. I'd watched it happen my whole life. The way she could turn a room against me in 15 seconds with nothing but a sad voice and the word fragile. He let out a long breath that fogged in the air, and he started to say it, the thing they always say. "Okay, folks, let's everybody calm down. This sounds like a civil matter." "It isn't a civil matter," I said. I didn't raise my voice. I'd learned a long time ago that the people who scream are the people who can't prove anything. I walked past my mother like she was a coat rack, and I put the binder in the deputy's hands. "My name is Maiden Sotelo," I said. "I'm the sole owner of this property. These people are not owners, they're not tenants, and they're not authorized to be here. The man inside just broke down a locked door to get into my office, and you have it on video. It's the first tab." The deputy opened the binder. The first page was a certified, notarized copy of the warranty deed, my name and only my name, recorded at the Dutchess County Clerk's office. The second tab was a time-stamped screenshot of the security feed, my father mid-swing with the coat rack, the office door coming apart. The third tab was the order, signed 2 days earlier, by a judge whose name I've been dreaming about, vacating the emergency conservatorship petition, and finding it had been filed in bad faith. I'd won that part already. They just hadn't been served yet. They planned a victory party for an empire that had been legally dissolved while they shopped for champagne. My father saw his own face in the photograph and his color went strange. "Now you listen to me," he started. "I put money into this place. I'm on the operating agreement. We have a signed operating agreement that gives the family management authority. It's right inside. It's in the safe she's hiding from us. That's why I had to, tab 4, I said to the deputy. I'd been waiting for the operating agreement. I knew it existed because my brother had emailed a copy to a loan officer, and I'd gotten that copy through a perfectly legal subpoena, and I'd had it examined. My father produced his version now, pulling a crisp folded document from inside his coat, a beautiful thing. Signatures and a notary stamp and a date 2 years old, and he handed it over with the confidence of a man who'd never once in his life been caught. "There," he said. "Signed and notarized 2 years ago. The family runs this venue. This is a business dispute and she's mentally—" "Look at the notary seal," I said. The deputy looked. So did my father. For the first time, really looked at the document he'd had forged, because I don't think he'd ever examined it that closely himself. I think he just paid for it, and trusted it the way he trusted everything he stole. "The commission number on that stamp," I said, "belongs to a notary in Albany." I called her. "I have her statement in tab 5. She never notarized this document, and her commission number wasn't even issued until 14 months ago. You can't notarize a document 2 years ago with a stamp that didn't exist yet." I turned the page for the deputy myself, because my hands were steady and I wanted them steady, and the file metadata, here, shows the PDF was created 9 days ago at 11:40 in the morning on a printer registered to my father's home office. It isn't 2 years old. It's 9 days old. It was made for tonight. "It's a reprint," my father said. "We lost the original." A reprint with a notary stamp that didn't exist when you claim it was signed, I said. Sure. The deputy's whole face had changed. The boredom was gone, replaced by the flat, careful attention of a man who has just realized he is standing in the middle of a crime and not a squabble. He looked at my father a beat too long. Sir, he said, do you have any actual proof of ownership or authority on this property? A deed, a lease, a utility bill in your name? It's all inside, my father said, and his voice cracked on the word inside. Tab 6, I said, because I wasn't finished. And I will admit there was something cold and bright moving through me by then that I'm not entirely proud of. My brother applied for a small business disaster loan 8 months ago, $200,000. He listed Hawthorne Hollow as collateral, and himself as the owner-operator. He doesn't own it. He's never owned any part of it. That's bank fraud and it's a federal offense, and the application's right here with his signature on it, and that one isn't forged. That one he signed himself. My brother made a sound like the air going out of something. He'd gone gray. His fiancée had stopped crying about her dress, and here is where I'd love to tell you that the worst of them showed some flicker of shame. But instead the fiancée did the stupidest thing I've ever watched a person do. She'd been edging toward the bench by the door where I'd set my bag down when I came in earlier in the week, and while everyone was looking at the binder, she reached into her clutch, pulled out a folded paper, and tried to slip it into my open tote, fast, like a magic trick. And then she straightened up and pointed at me and said, loud, she stole documents from the safe. Check her bag. It's all in her bag. She's been planning this. For a second, the deputy actually turned toward me. For a second. There's a camera in the rafter above that bench, I said quietly. I held up my phone. The feed was right there, live. And I'd already scrubbed it back 30 seconds with my thumb. Here's the last minute on screen. Watch her hand. The deputy watched. He watched her reach into her own clutch, pull out the paper, and push it into my bag, on camera, in color, in front of 2 officers and the people who loved her. Then he watched her point at me and lie about it. He watched it twice. He looked up at her and she opened her mouth and nothing came out. Turn around, ma'am, he said. Hands behind your back. It happened quickly after that, the way these things do once the first cuff closes. The second deputy called for a supervisor and said the words forgery and fraud into a shoulder radio. They cuffed my father next, reading the words off the little card, and he kept saying my name like it was an accusation, like I'd done something to him. They put my brother in the second car for the loan application, separately, because you separate them. You don't let them write the story together in the back seat. My mother stood in the middle of the gravel with the snow coming down on her bare shoulders, and she watched her husband and her son and her future daughter-in-law get folded into 3 different vehicles, and she turned to me with her face working through every expression she owned, looking for the one that had always gotten her what she wanted and finding that none of them fit anymore. Marin, she said. Sweetheart, we're your family. Get off my property, I said. A tow truck came up the hill while they were still loading my father, because the deputy ran the plates on the Lexus, blocking my barn doors, and it turned out the registration had been expired for 7 months. They hooked it up and dragged it down the icy drive into the dark, and I want you to know that out of the entire night, the expired tags are the detail I think about most. Because it's so perfectly them. They'll forge a federal document and file a fraudulent loan and try to have their own daughter declared incompetent, but they cannot be bothered to renew a registration. The big crimes were always so much easier for them than the small responsibilities. My mother had no car. They'd all come together. She stood in the snow in her good shoes and asked the deputy in her smallest voice if someone could give her a ride, and he told her, not unkindly, that a deputy would take her statement and then she'd need to arrange her own transportation. And I left her standing there because I had nowhere in me left to feel sorry for her, and I was done pretending I did. I went inside. The barn was cold and dark, and full of abandoned champagne glasses and a fallen tower of them by the bar where someone had knocked it over running, and the office door hung off its frame in splinters. I turned the power back on, room by room, and the string lights came up gold again over all that wreckage. And it should have looked like ruin, but it didn't. It looks like mine. I did not throw anything away. I want to say that plainly, because I know how these stories usually end, with someone dramatically deleting a file or burning a folder. And that's not what a careful person does. The original stayed in the safe behind that broken door. The copy stayed with my attorney and in the box at the bank, where they'd been the whole time, where they'd wait for the district attorney and the grand jury and the long, slow, satisfying machinery of consequences I'd spent 11 months feeding. What I did delete, sitting at my own kitchen counter at 2 a.m. with a glass of wine I finally let myself pour, was a contact group on my phone labeled Family. It had a photo attached, the 5 of us at some Christmas a decade ago, all of us smiling, my father's arm around me. I'd kept that picture through everything, the way you keep a key to a house you don't live in anymore. I looked at it for a while. Then I let it go. The barn was quiet. The kind of quiet you can only hear after a long, long noise stops. I took a sip, and for the first time in 2 years, the silence didn't feel like something circling me in the dark. It felt like a room I'd finally cleared. And it was warm, and it was mine, and not one of them would ever set foot in it again. The thing nobody tells you about being robbed by your own family is how much of the damage you do to yourself, in advance, on their behalf. For years I handed my father pens. I signed where he pointed. I called it generosity because the truth was too heavy to pick up, and a story you can live with always feels lighter than a fact you'd have to act on. The withdrawals, the forged cards, the loan against Hawthorne Hollow I never authorized, none of it could have grown the way it did if I hadn't spent a decade looking away. Causes pile up quietly. Effects arrive all at once. The night the lights went out in that barn wasn't the night everything changed. It was just the night the bill came due for everything that already had. What saved me wasn't anger, though I had plenty of it. Anger is what my father had, swinging a coat rack at a locked door, because he never learned any other way to get what he wanted. Anger breaks things. It doesn't build a case. What actually saved me was the slower, colder work of refusing to lie to myself any longer, letting myself see the notary stamp that couldn't have existed 2 years ago. The metadata that didn't match the story, the brother who signed a fraudulent loan in his own confident hand. Seeing clearly is its own kind of strength, and it's the one I'd neglected the longest. I'd used it on strangers in courtrooms for years, and never once turned it on the people at my own table. And then there was the part I'm proudest of, which doesn't photograph well, and doesn't make a thumbnail. 11 months of keeping 3 copies of everything, of going to work, paying my contractor, hanging string lights, all a petition to erase me sat on a judge's desk, of not exploding at Thanksgiving when exploding would have felt so good and proven nothing. That patience cost me more than the money ever did. It's easy to be brave for an evening. It's hard to stay steady for a year while the people who made you tell a courthouse you're insane. I think about my mother standing in the snow in her good shoes, asking for a ride, and I don't feel triumph anymore. I feel the simple arithmetic of it. They chose what to value, and what they valued ate them. I chose to stay honest about what was happening, sharp about how to prove it, and stubborn enough to outlast their head start. Those 3 things together are the whole of it. Hold to what's right even when it's slow. See what's true even when it's your own family, and carry it longer than anyone expects you to. The barn is quiet now, and warm, and mine. I earned the quiet the hard way, which is the only way it ever really stays.